I wanted to bring today's episode to the podcast talking about constipation. We regularly see this with the clients that we work with in our couples coaching program. And a lot of the times we focus on the diagnosis, whether it be low AMH or POI, POF, diminished ovarian reserve, unexplained infertility. We focus on that diagnosis and we forget all the other symptoms that are going on in your body. So if you have constipation, this is a huge red flag for us to dig into. And there's simple strategies you can take right now to address constipation, which helps with your hormone balance. So excited for you to listen to this episode. And this also includes your partner as well. So take care. I'm excited to announce that our Fertility Diet Challenge is live starting this week, Monday, January the 11th. We are taking you through the challenge live. I've got special guest experts from chefs to our nutrition practitioners to myself joining you live on this challenge. We are going to be cooking together and you're going to figure out how diet impacts your fertility. This challenge is for you and your partner. All you need to do is go to fertilitydietfreebie.com. That's fertilitydietfreebie.com. Download the recipes. Join us this week. Excited for you to start. All you need to do is go to fertilitydietfreebie.com. I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 4 spots available per month to work with us. I would like to invite you and your partner to a Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery Call. And this call is for you if you meet at least one of these criteria. You've been trying to get pregnant for at least 2 years. You've been through at least one failed IUI or IVF. This calls for action takers. If you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. If you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, F-A-B Fertile, and click on Book a Free Call. That's FabFertile, F-A-B Fertile, and click on Book a Free Call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. Hey there. Thanks so much for listening to the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast. And I've got a favor to ask you. If you are enjoying learning about the functional approach to fertility, consider going to iTunes and rating and reviewing the podcast. This is how it helps the show reach more people that are struggling with infertility, knowing that there's another approach that really can get to the bottom of why it's not working in the first place. So all you need to do is, if you're on the app or the desktop, just go in and consider leaving a 5-star rating and leave a review. And there is step-by-step instructions in the show notes showing you exactly how to do that. So if you can just take a few minutes, just take the few minutes right now. You can pause this recording, come back, leave the review. It would really mean the world to me and help others that are on the fertility journey as well. Take care. I didn't need to go to donor eggs. Obviously, I don't regret it. I have beautiful children. I could have done things differently, restored. I was still cycling back in my 20s. I could have looked at my health, the environmental toxins, the stress I was under.
Many women are being told their eggs are too old. That's often merely an assumption that's not based on actual evidence. The reason being that there is no direct test of egg quality. You can't test egg quality.
It's the man who's got a food sensitivity or he has a zinc deficiency.
Like, there can be a root cause to these symptoms that are, quote unquote, period problems, that the doctor will pass you a pill without any question of why.
And some part of you knows that if you can reframe your journey from not want to struggle, or if it is struggle, learn how to embrace the struggle. Learn how to embrace it.
Most conditions in the child occur during the 9 months of development. It's the genetic switches are turned on or turned off, and they're pre-programmed. So you are in such a powerful, amazing position to do amazing things for your kids.
Why is IVF the first step? Because we believe it should be the last step. Welcome to Get Pregnant Naturally, where functional medicine and natural fertility solutions will help you get pregnant and have your baby. Hey there, I'm Sarah Clark, founder of FabFertile and your host. I believe the functional approach is the first step for anyone struggling with infertility, and my aim is to help you get pregnant naturally. Today, I'm welcoming Justine Altman back to the podcast, and we're digging into why addressing constipation matters if you are trying to conceive. Definitely check out episode number 6 for a functional medicine 101 talk, plus a look at some of the tools we use to help couples conceive. Justine is part of my team here at Fab Fertile, and she is an integral part of our couples coaching program, which uses functional lab testing, diet, and lifestyle changes to dramatically improve conception. So if you are struggling with infertility, your body is desperately trying to tell you something. Focusing on your health will either help you get pregnant naturally, or if you do need to go to the fertility clinic, it will improve your chances of success. Justine is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, and she was diagnosed with PCOS and struggled with infertility. She had her first baby with fertility treatments, but after taking a functional approach, was able to conceive her second child naturally. So thanks so much for listening. So thankful that you're here. Make sure you hit subscribe. And if you know someone else who is on the fertility journey, please share this podcast with them. Hey, Justine, excited to have you back on the podcast.
Excited to be here. Thanks, Sarah.
Awesome. Today we're digging into, this is Justine's favorite topic, and we are constantly talking about it. It is constipation, and a lovely topic, but it is really important when you're dealing with infertility. And we're going to talk about why that is the case if you do have constipation. Well, first of all, I'm just going to give a little stat here to start with. So it's estimated that an annual expenditure on over-the-counter laxatives in the U.S. is now at $800 million. I'm like, holy cow. And 60% of women report experiencing symptoms of constipation at least weekly, and more than 90% report experiencing monthly symptoms. Like, I know when I think of my group of girlfriends, which I've had since I was like 12, and we're still all together, funnily enough, there's definitely a significant amount of them that are like, it would go maybe a couple times a week and thinking that's normal. Now, I have personally never had an issue in this department. It's basically been once a day. That's how I am. But let's talk about, well, first of all, so why is looking at constipation important for fertility? Why do we care?
Yeah, so constipation, it causes all sorts of issues, right? Like the body has this system that's just supposed to be working. And when it's working, we're moving our bowels regularly, right? 1 to 3 times a day. And when that doesn't happen, the body is unable to get out the things it wants to get out, right? So it's this mechanism where it gets rid of all this waste and all this stuff that wasn't good for us that came into our body somehow. Like, with food, if we're eating non-organic food and there's pesticides and herbicides, or anything else really that's a toxin that gets into our body, the body wants to move that out as quickly as possible. And if it can't, it's sort of just hanging out there, and it gets reabsorbed through the lining of the gut into the bloodstream, right? And so now those toxins are in our body when they were supposed to be moved out. And so it's just sort of more work, and it's also just stress on the bowels, right? And so all these toxins continue to get reabsorbed. And one of them is estrogen, right? We have this used up estrogen and the body can't move it out. And when that happens, we just sort of have this level of toxicity that builds up, and we have this accumulation of estrogen that builds up. And now we've got symptoms of estrogen dominance, right? And so all sorts of hormonal imbalance symptoms, things like hot flashes and PMS and frequent periods and the heavy periods and the headaches. And then, of course, we know a buildup of estrogen leads to further complications down the road, right? Estrogen is involved in some cancers. So it's really important that we continue to have our bowels moving regularly. And like you said, Sarah, like it's a common thing, but common isn't the same as normal,
Right.
Right? So even though it's common, even though a lot of people have this, it doesn't mean it's okay. And it is a sign, like our body's telling us something isn't moving quite right.
Exactly. And equally important for men and women, not just women. I think, women experience it more frequently than men. I know I always want to call him partner, but my husband, he would go 3 times a day. And I'm like, okay, you're kind of weird. Like, why are you going so much? This is crazy, but it's normal to go 1 to 3 times a day. That's normal. He's like, I'm normal. Yeah. Cause a lot of times I think we're seeing the people that are going every couple of days, and maybe we start thinking that's normal.
Yeah, absolutely. I hear it happen a lot. I'm in sort of a lot of mommy circles, and the same thing with babies, right? And doctors will even say, oh, well, that's fine if the baby goes a week. But ultimately it's not fine for anyone, right? We've all got to be going regularly, or again, we get this toxin buildup and it's a stress on the digestive tract, and the body just can't digest our foods very well. So there's sort of all sorts of things going on for everyone, men, women, young, middle-aged, old, everybody. It matters that we're going regularly.
Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about the frequency and kind of what it should like in a perfect world. And also, just for the listeners to go definitely check out the episode I did with Dr. Marisol. And we talked all about, she has a whole thing on poop, and we just go into the minutia of this for what to look for. So definitely check that episode out with Dr. Marisol. But so as far as an ideal scene, what are we looking for right now, kind of briefly?
Yeah. So, in the perfect picture, right? You wake up and you use the bathroom and you have a drink of water and you need to have your first poop sometime early in the morning. And then, you go once or twice more throughout the day. So that's sort of the ideal scene. And ultimately you want to be able to, you have the urge. It's not an emergency, but you go use the bathroom, you sit down, everything happens in roughly, 30 seconds, 60 seconds with very little effort, right? It just sort of happens on its own. And ultimately, the nitty-gritty details, right? That it's smooth and some color of brown and that it sinks. Mm-hmm. And essentially anything that varies from that ideal scene is an indication that something isn't quite right? So if we're not going often enough, if we're actually having to push and use a lot of effort to get it out, if the color's off, right? So if we've got yellow or green or red or anything that's some shade of brown, right? Then that's another clue. Or if it's not the right shape. So I don't know if some of our listeners are familiar with the Bristol stool chart, but essentially, right? We don't want pellets. We don't want water. We don't want, one that looks like corn on the cob, right? We don't want it to be pitted instead, because all of those things sort of indicate trending in one direction or another with something that's not quite right. So essentially we want it to be nice and smooth. And if it floats, we know that means we're not absorbing our fats very well. So basically everything that could be astray from that ideal scene tells us that something isn't quite right. It's a clue that our body's giving us. And
I should have given a warning at the beginning of this episode. Don't listen to this while you're eating. Yeah. And in that episode I did with Dr. Marisol, she talks about a banana. So your poop should be the length of your forearm.
Wow. Yeah. So it's, so there are lots of forms.
And I'm 6 foot tall. So that's a lot of freaking food.
It is, there's a lot of variations in our bowel movements, of course. Right. And so it's important that we talk about some of these nitty gritty details, right? Because otherwise we don't necessarily know. And I've certainly had clients before where, constipation is not one of the symptoms that they report. But when we start to talk about bowel movements, come to find out there are lots of signs of constipation. And it may be that you are still going once a day. But, if the poops are small or if they're, very dark in color or anything along those lines, it's still an indication that there's some level of constipation, that your body's not able to move everything out the way that it's supposed to. And if you think about it, right? So say you really, again, with the warning about not listening while you're eating. But, say you chew up food, right? And if you just left that food sit there for a couple of days somewhere out of your mouth, it would start to rot, right? Well, the same kind of thing happens in our body, right? So if the waste can't move through, it starts to putrefy, basically. And of course, that's not good for us, right? And so there were toxins in it originally. There's toxins in every bit of food we eat these days, that your body's trying to move out, but now also it's starting to rot and it's starting to create other chemicals, other toxins that are not good for us. And so even if you're going every day, there's still other clues out there that something might not be optimum, basically.
Yeah. And that chronic constipation versus maybe sometimes we have every once in a while that will go every other day or it's not perfect. Can you just describe that for us, chronic versus every once in a while?
Yeah. So with chronic constipation, it tends to be more of a long-term issue where it's pretty irregular. So, these are the kinds of people where they're going every couple of days, they're going, once a week, something along those lines. And it really becomes this compound problem, right? Because we don't know exactly what caused the constipation to begin with without sort of digging into sort of the history and how did it start and what was going on. And there are lots of contributing factors, right? So if we don't have the right minerals, if we don't have, if we don't give ourselves time to use the bathroom, right? If we avoid it for some reason, we see this in kids sometimes too. But it really becomes this issue because the bowels really sort of start to develop stress. And we start to have this issue where the nerve system that controls the bowels doesn't sort of get all of the signals. It sort of loses its tone. And so it's just this constant sort of vicious cycle where the system is under stress. And then the more there's constipation, the more that there's like a backlog, that there's just more stress. There's more toxins being circulated through the body. And that continues to wear the body down, right? So the more toxins we've got circulating through the body, they start to deposit. Now we've got this sort of toxic load, this toxic burden going on in our body that really sort of takes away from the resources for our body to do well. So we've got this situation where it just sort of continuously compounds where now it's starting to affect the other areas of our body as well.
Yeah. And we work with a lot of people that have actually undiagnosed or diagnosed thyroid issues, either hypothyroidism, Graves' disease, Hashimoto's. So with that can come issues with constipation. So can you talk about the issues between thyroid problems and constipation?
Yeah, so when there are thyroid issues, so it's a chicken or the egg situation, right? When there are thyroid issues, it can cause constipation because the thyroid, when it's low, it's the body saying we need to slow down for some reason. It's slowing down the person's metabolism on purpose. And it does that in an effort to conserve resources, right? It's afraid, we are these primitive beings, and our body senses stress. It senses stress in our environment. It senses stress in the foods we're eating or whatever it may be. And the body says, okay, we're not sure that this is a good situation and they might be in danger. So we need to protect her. We need to protect him. We need to make sure that they conserve resources, that they make it through whatever situation might face them in the near future. And so it intentionally slows down our metabolism so that we don't burn through our vitamins and our minerals and our fuel as quickly. And when that happens, it slows down our bowels as well. And then vice versa, right? So we were talking earlier about constipation. When there's constipation, it has this toxin buildup. When the toxins build up, it has an effect on our adrenal glands, which affects our ability to sort of manage stress, adapt to stress. And it's just sort of this cascade effect. So we talk all the time with our clients about when there are issues with the thyroid, it's rarely a problem with the thyroid itself. It's rarely an issue where the thyroid actually is malfunctioning. It's usually a situation where there aren't enough resources for the thyroid to make thyroid hormone. So we could have low iodine, or we could have low selenium, or we could have liver congestion, right? And so that's a big factor there. So if we've got the constipation going on and these toxins keep recirculating through our body and sort of depositing in the body, then the liver is sort of overburdened, right? That's the liver's major role is to filter out toxins. And so it's just this sort of, the whole body, right? And that's why we work holistically, because everything is connected. And so we just want to make sure that the constipation, the toxins in there aren't affecting the liver, which is struggling to move things out. And the problem just continues to build and continues to make thyroid worse. And so we don't know which came first. In some cases, it's one. In some cases, it's the other. But ultimately, they're constantly at play with one another.
Yeah, we're typically dealing with low AMH, premature ovarian insufficiency or failure, and also diminished ovarian reserve, and also primary or secondary infertility. And a lot of the times we see the theme of a thyroid issue, and then we talk to our clients all the time about the theme of constipation. So not getting stuck on that diagnosis and looking to see what else is going on in the body. And a lot of times we're just like, let's look at egg health. Meanwhile, we're not sleeping, we're completely constipated, and we're stressed out, completely stressed. There's physical stressors as well as the mental, emotional stressors. So all of these episodes we do to curate them to really be able to have you look beyond your diagnosis and say, oh, wait a minute, what's been missed?
Absolutely.
And so the next one we have is, gut infection. So as part of our couples coaching program, we have access to functional testing. And one of the tests that we like doing is the GI map stool test. That's looking at the DNA of your stool. I'd say the majority of people we work with, there's something going on in the stool, be it a parasite, a worm, a fungal infection, a bacteria. And the whole idea is to then eliminate and then optimize the health of the gut. And so gut infections and constipation. So if you have constipation, that can also be an indicator potentially that you have a gut infection. So what are you seeing there, Justine?
Yeah, so when it comes to the microbiome, right? So we have some friendly flora and some unfriendly flora in the gut. And this is true for every human. And the friendly flora help us digest our foods, right? So it breaks down our foods. We absorb more of our nutrients that way. And there's less waste for the body to move out. The unfriendly flora, they do the opposite. They don't help us digest our food, and instead they create these byproducts that are toxic to us, right? So gut bug farts, basically, that do minute amounts of damage, little by little, over time in our gut. And when that happens, now the gut is not as healthy, is not as strong, is not as able to do what it's supposed to do. And that leads to more constipation, right? So when the gut isn't as strong as it's supposed to be, it struggles to have the movement that it's supposed to. And especially to have this migrating motor complex that happens that helps move waste out of the digestive tract. We definitely see more constipation when there are gut infections. And then on the flip side of that, when we've got gut infections and we want to do some work to try to alter the microbiome, right? To seed the gut with really good bacteria and to help weed out some of the unfriendly flora, that constipation is one of the first things we have to address before we can even do some of that work. And that's because if constipation is an issue, we really struggle to move the toxins out. And in order to move those gut bugs out, we've got to have a nice, clear detox pathway. And we have other detox pathways as well, right? Our liver's involved, our kidneys are involved, our skin is a detox organ, but being able to move the bowels is super important. Otherwise, any of this work that we try to do to optimize, the body's trying to do the work, it's trying to move out toxins, it's trying to use new resources it's been given, but it just can't if the constipation sticks around. So in a lot of cases, we really have to make sure that we address constipation, that we get on top of it in one way or another before we do some of that deeper work.
Yeah. And with the testing, it's like that test, don't guess. And so we can identify what the infections are in there and then help to eradicate them. And then, optimize what's happening with your bowels. And the next one we have is magnesium deficiency. This is something, I've seen stats that 85% of us are deficient in magnesium. Actually had Dr. Carolyn Dean on the podcast, and she's like a world-renowned expert on magnesium. This is for me for years. I had like the twitching eye and the cramping legs and my foot. Like I'd go to sleep, but it would like cramp up and I have to get out of the bed and walk around the room. And now I take my magnesium and that's not the case, but also low magnesium can be some other issues too. But let's talk about low magnesium deficiency and constipation and what you're seeing there.
Yeah. So like you said, there's just tons of magnesium deficiency all around. And for that reason, it's one of the things that we typically recommend to just about everyone right off the bat when they're starting off in the program. And we see that if we supplement with magnesium, that it really has a tremendous impact on constipation for a lot of people. Magnesium's a goofy thing. The recommendation out there, I can't remember what the exact amount is, but I want to say it's something like 200 milligrams in a day. And ultimately, we find that people in supplemental form tend to need somewhere between 3 and 5 times their body weight in magnesium in a day, right? And so we're looking at like 500 to 1,000 to, much larger amounts of magnesium than what's the recommended daily amount there. And so we tend to find that people are pretty deficient in magnesium, even if they've been doing a bit of a supplement. And usually when we add magnesium, it really makes a big difference in constipation. And we can even use magnesium in that way if constipation is currently an issue, to sort of get to the right amount of magnesium that gets us the right level of bowel movements. So for example, if we're taking 200 milligrams of magnesium and we're not having good bowel movements, and we increase it to 300 or 400 or 500, essentially we can increase until we get to a level where we start to have the right consistency of bowel movements and the right frequency of bowel movements. And it really makes a difference there. And it helps because it's a calming mineral, and it helps to relax the bowels so that they have the ability to sort of let go and let the waste move through, and essentially let everything move the way that it's supposed to.
And the next one we have is stress, mental, emotional stress, the mind-body piece. And there's a whole, not spiritual, but I guess mind-body thing where you're actually holding on to things, like as in literally holding on to your poop, your toxins. And how do you then release control? Can you talk a little bit about some of that with stress and constipation and what you're seeing there?
Yeah, so stress, like you said, it's really just this issue of like, it's a whole body thing, right? So if we're tense, right? If your muscles are tense, if your mind is tense, we tend to tense our bowels as well. So it's really just as simple as that, that it's a matter of being able to sort of loosen up and let go of that stress. And we tend to let go of the waste as well. And so in some cases, I've heard of people actually doing, mindfulness exercises on the toilet. And that's part of what we talk about with people sometimes, right? Is that one of the things that tends to lead to constipation. So there are tons of sort of biochemical reasons, right? All the stuff that we work on from a functional perspective to help the body just sort of release itself of whatever disease or whatever symptoms it's having. But we tend to have these busy lives, right? And we don't necessarily make time for the potty. So there's this philosophy that, and it's something that I've recommended to people a number of times, where you actually have to make space for it. So actually like have I don't know that you need to put it on your calendar, but have a morning routine, right? Where you get up, maybe you have to pee in the morning and you have your glass of water. I don't know if you have morning supplements or whatever, part of your morning routine, but essentially that there's a time built into your morning where you have the ability to spend 15 minutes in the bathroom without being distracted, without being, without having things that you need to rush to, so that you've actually given your body a nice, quiet, relaxed time to be able to eliminate, and not everyone needs this, but for those of you who are experiencing constipation at some level, it's important to give the body the time and to have a routine, just like we have a bedtime routine. Like your body gets used to it. And so in the first couple of days, it doesn't always work wonders, but your body starts to clue in and go, oh, this is potty time. And especially if we add in a squatty potty to that mix. So this is like a stool that goes in front of you that you put your feet on that puts your sort of knees at the right angle that basically helps to open up your bowels so that there's not sort of a narrowing of the bowels. And it just makes it easier to go. But when we get in that mindset of just sort of being relaxed, this is my time, this is my bathroom time, being relaxed, then we tend to see that the problem really sort of starts to correct on its own, as long as we've got the good inputs, right? So we still have to do the work on the diet. We still have to be getting good sleep. We still have to be taking care of ourselves. But as long as we've sort of got some of those fundamentals in place, then a lot of times the constipation will start to relieve itself if we just give it time and we give it relaxation.
Do you have a squatty potty that you recommend, or?
Yeah, so there's actually a brand called Squatty Potty. Mm-hmm. They have a couple of different options based on, I think they have some kids versions. And then they have options based on like the height of your toilet off of your floor. And then of course, you don't have to have a fancy squatty potty. You also can just use a stool. But essentially the idea is that your feet aren't right together and they're not super widespread apart, but they're somewhere, sort of in line with your knees basically. And that your knees are roughly, your legs are roughly 90-degree angles at your knees. So essentially what we're trying to imitate is the squat that presumably primitive humans were using, right, when they were out in nature.
Right. And what about rebounding then? We have people do this as part of when they're starting making dietary changes and also adding some other supplements in. There can be some die-off and detox reactions. So we talk about dry skin brushing and rebounding to move the lymph, and that can help with constipation. What are you seeing there?
Yeah. So, anything we can do to move the lymph helps the entire system, right? Because it's moving out toxins. Our lymph system is another part of our detox system. And the lymph, unlike the circulatory system, doesn't have a circulatory system. So it actually needs physical movement in order for us to be able to move sort of old cellular debris, old junk, old toxins out of the lymph system. And so there are lots of ways to accomplish this. The dry brushing is certainly one of them, where we're just sort of gently brushing against the skin. The rebounding, so jumping on a trampoline or jogging or anything that sort of gets you jumping, helps to move the lymph. And even things like massage, right? So there are even massage therapists out there who specialize in lymph drainage. But anything we can do to help move toxins out helps take the burden off of the bowels, right? It helps take the burden off of every other part of the body for that matter, right? The more that we move out the toxins on a regular basis, the less strain it puts on our adrenal glands and essentially every other part of the body sort of on down the line, right? Because all of it is connected. When the adrenals are stressed and we can't adapt to stress as much or as well as we used to, then every other organ and every other system starts to be affected little by little in little ways. And of course, when constipation happens, and just like any other symptom too, when we start to get the symptoms, it means what's going on is sort of deeply rooted at this point, where things have been going on for a while before symptoms appear usually. And that's not true in all cases, right? In some cases, like there's a big trauma that happens and that sort of engages this situation where it zaps all of our resources. We sort of start to see symptoms pretty early on. But in a lot of cases, whatever the root cause is, that's probably been going on for months or in many cases, even years.
So let's talk about some more strategies to help constipation. So we've talked a little bit about exercise with rebounding and then adding in some cardio to really it's about moving your body, not vigorous exercise, but adding some movement in there. And then relaxed when you are eating, not like actually sitting down at the table, typically having, some conversation, or if you're by yourself, not reading or watching anything and just being relaxed when you're eating. I know I noticed that if I'm like freaking pounding my food in because I've got to get to a call or I get to a next appointment, it impacts my digestion in a big way. And I never really noticed that before, maybe because I'm getting old. I don't know. But now I'm like, I need to eat in not like for hours and hours, but definitely in a more relaxed way. And then drinking more water, making sure you're having, we talk about this in our fertility series about drinking 50 to 75% of your body weight in ounces in water, making sure you're having enough water. And then looking at the fiber, so increasing the non-starchy veggies. Anything you want to add into those ones that we just talked about, Justine?
Yeah, I would love to elaborate on the relaxed eating. This is super important. I think I want to start with a little bit of a description of sort of how food moves through the body, right? So when we see our food and we smell our food, our body, it's just amazing what our bodies can do. Our digestive tract recognizes the food that you're about to eat before you've even put any to your lips. And it starts to produce the enzymes that are going to break down that food. And so just being in the vicinity of the food being prepared is actually already starting that digestive process. And then when we take a bite, we chew it up, right? And we want to chew it really thoroughly. So we want to be taking our time. So we don't want to be distracted. So as much as possible, we want to not be eating at our desks. I'm certainly guilty of this just about every day, but we want to not be eating at our desks. We want to be eating, in a calm situation with friends and family is ideal. We want to chew every bite really thoroughly, right? So 30 times is the ideal situation. We put down our fork in between, we take our time, we savor every bite. And the more that we do that, the more our body is really honing in on preparing to digest the exact food you just ate, the exact vegetable, the exact meat, the exact whatever it was. It's important that we chew it up really thoroughly because we need it to be broken up into small particles when it gets to our stomach. So we swallow it down. It's been churned with our saliva. It goes down into our stomach and it gets bathed in stomach acid and it gets broken down even further there. And then it makes the transition from the stomach into the small intestines and it gets sort of coated with some bile from the gallbladder. The gallbladder squishes out some bile and that helps us break down our fats. And now the particles are broken down even further. And here in the small intestines is where we start to absorb the nutrients, the vitamins and the minerals into our bloodstream to fuel all our body, right? So then the blood takes it and delivers those nutrients all around the body, to every organ, to every system, to every cell of the body. And then after that happens, it goes down into our colon, right? And our body gets rid of whatever it couldn't use and whatever is a toxin. So at any part, if we don't do this in a relaxed state, right? So we're not chewing enough. We're not letting it sort of churn in saliva enough. Sometimes we end up with low stomach acid and it's not getting bathed in stomach acid and broken down enough. But ultimately, if the particles aren't broken down enough when they get to the small intestines, we can't absorb all of the nutrients. We can't absorb the vitamins and the minerals well enough. And that leads to more constipation, right? Because now because the particles weren't small enough, they just have to move through the digestive tract instead of being absorbed. So it's really important that we take our time to chew our food, to be relaxed, and to have sort of this rest and digest mindset. Because the other part of the picture is if we're in this sympathetic nervous system situation, this fight or flight situation where we're go, 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 or where we're under stress of some kind, or our mind is still, churning on work or whatever it is that sort of, threw a monkey wrench at us in our day, then our body isn't relaxed. It isn't in this phase to really digest our food, right? And that's because when stress is high, our cortisol, our stress hormone is high, and it robs resources from our rest and digest organs, from our digestive tract, from our immune system, from our reproductive system. So it's really important that we sort of get into this calm mode as we start eating or before we start eating. And so one of the things that we've done at my kitchen table many times is actually doing 30 seconds of breathing exercises. It sounds silly, but my husband and I and our 2 young kids will actually sit around the table and do 30 seconds of breathing exercises before we start eating to sort of move us into that parasympathetic mode, move us into that mode where we are in this rest and digest phase so that our body has the ability to properly digest all of the food that we're eating. And so that it gives us the clue that we need to slow down and to chew our food thoroughly and to make our meal last however long it needs to last. So it should take you 20 minutes or so to eat a meal rather than scarfing it all down in 3 to 5.
And I think even just making the priority to get to the table, like to get away from, and a lot of us are eating at our laptop and so to even just getting to the table at least once a day. I don't know. I'm kind of I'm like a robot with that, where I kind of make sure that I eat at the table for lunch and dinner. For breakfast, I'm on a smoothie kick. So I take that at my desk, but being able to, to get there with you and your partner, being able to sit down together, and that's a whole time to connect as well. And then like we talked about, making time for the bathroom, sleep, which is a huge one. We've got a whole episode on that with the Fertility series where you can listen to us talking about some strategies for sleep. Vagus nerve stimulation. Can you talk about that? I guess that's doing some gargling and other things to stimulate the vagus nerve.
Yeah. So that vagus nerve, it's responsible for our bowel movements in a large part. And there are lots of different things we can do to stimulate the vagus nerve if vagal tone is low vagal tone is part of of the contributing problem. And in most cases, it's a contributing factor at some level. So essentially, if we've got low vagal tone, then our bowels just aren't getting the signal from our brain. The signals aren't going in both directions to tell our bowels when it's time to move. And so there are lots of things that we can do to stimulate the vagus nerve. So gargling is definitely one of them. Singing is another one. Humming is another one. We think that it's one of the reasons that sort of chanting became, was a thing. In other cultures and in previous times. And then coffee enemas is another thing that stimulates the vagus nerve. So there are lots of things out there that can really help. And I encourage you guys to, if this is something of interest, to just Google it, vagus nerve stimulation. There's tons and tons of articles out there on the web. But essentially there's sort of how-to references about, so gargling, we all know how you gargle. But for vagus nerve stimulation, we recommend gargling basically sort of at a sort of deep level. So basically we gargle almost until we tear. But essentially there are lots of little things that we can do that just help stimulate that nerve, which helps those signals start to go back and forth between the brain and the bowels to tell the bowels when it's time to move.
I used to gargle a lot when I was young. I don't know. Like my dad was gargling. It's funny because I haven't gargled in ages. I guess I gargle like salt water, but yeah, I don't know if I've done it till I've started crying. Huh, that's an interesting one.
Well, yeah. You haven't needed to. You don't have a problem in that department.
Yeah, with the constipation. Okay, and so foods to avoid. What should we be avoiding if we're dealing with constipation?
Yeah, so we all know that dairy stops us up, right? So definitely dairy. Dairy is a problem for most people. Most of us have trouble digesting dairy at some level. And then there are other things that I see that that tend to cause constipation a lot. So dried fruits, and this is something, if you've done an elimination type diet, something like the Whole30 or autoimmune protocol, a lot of people inevitably rediscover dried fruits, right? Because when you're doing a diet like that that's sort of restrictive, we're cutting out all of our normal go-tos for treats, right? So we're not eating chocolate, we're not eating baked goods, we're not eating things like that. And so the fill-in for people, they tend to find dried fruits like, oh, well, this is legal on my diet, right? Because it's just fruit. Yep, exactly. It's just fruit, but it's super sweet and it's tasty and it's convenient and you can just pull it out of the pantry and it's shelf stable. And so we tend to start to eat dried fruits, and constipation sometimes creeps up on us when that happens. And the same things if nuts are on your diet. So dried fruits, the reason that they're constipating is because the moisture has been pulled out of them, right? And so when you eat them, it sort of has to draw moisture back in to the fruit in order for it to be digested. And that just sort of steals fluids away from the rest of the process. And dried fruits, they cause an insane amount of gas for some people too. I've made myself absolutely miserable overdoing it on dried apricots before. But it's easy to overeat them as well, right? So, you in one sitting, you could sit and eat, 6 or 8 pieces of dried apricot. When if you think about it, you would never actually eat 6 or 8 whole apricots, right? So it's really easy to overdo it with the dried fruits. And then with nuts or anything else that you don't digest well, that certainly can add to constipation, right? Because we're just not breaking it down well enough. So anything that you find whole bits of in your stool, that's something that has potential to be contributing to constipation, because it just means it's something that you are not digesting well, or at least right now you're not digesting it well. And that just adds bulk. It adds more waste for your body to move through because you're not actually absorbing any of the nutrients from it. It's just more work for the body to sort of try to move it through.
Now let's talk about enemas and colonics. I personally have never done a coffee enema. I've looked at it many times and it just seems overly complicated for me, and I haven't done a colonic. Can you talk about those and why that would be important?
Yeah. So I did a handful of colonics a handful of years ago. And it was back when I was experiencing some severe constipation, like to the point where there was really a lot of pain in my belly. And I was concerned that I was, on the phone with the doctor. I was that concerned about it. It was pretty intense. And so in my opinion, the colonics, it's a tool to use if you're sort of having an acute situation, right? So if it's been a handful of days since you've gone, that's one way to resolve the situation sort of immediately. A coffee enema is another option. So it's very similar to a colonic. So in both cases, it's sort of an irrigation of the system. The coffee enema has the added benefit where the caffeine in the coffee stimulates the liver a bit, and it causes the liver to contract. And when it does that, if you think of the liver as sort of like a sponge that's got soap in it, when it contracts a bit, it's starting to expel some of the stuff that's in it. And the liver is the same way, right? So if we've got our liver is a little under stress. And I would argue that that just about everyone on the planet that's been living a few years or more has some level of liver stress going on, right? Our planet just is more toxic than what our bodies were built for. So it helps to sort of squish out some of that junk that's stuck in the liver, that's clogging up the liver, and that's making our liver a bit sluggish. So the enemas have the ability to sort of do double duty, where it gives a little bit of a detox for you, but also it just sort of helps to irrigate, helps to clear out some of the material that's been there. And in some cases, depending on the level of severity of the constipation, there could be fecal matter that's been in there for a very long time. So it just really sort of helps slough it off and helps clear out and helps if you're having, like I said, an acute situation where it's been a few days since you've gone, that'll certainly get it moving and get everything sort of cleared out for you. So you're sort of, starting with a clean slate, basically.
Anything you want to say on mineral levels?
Yeah. So with mineral levels, it really matters. So again, this sort of goes back primarily to constipation or to magnesium rather. But essentially, if we're low in some minerals, the calming minerals especially, so magnesium or calcium, then we just tend toward constipation because our bowels are just sort of, they're tense like we are rather than calm. And so we see that if we tend to balance minerals, and we do this in our couples coaching program where we assess minerals with a hair test that tells us what's going on with minerals at the cellular level, that if we can bring balance to the minerals, that we have some movement. It's a funny pun today. That we have some movement in how the digestive tract is able to do what it's supposed to do.
Okay, so some supplement recommendations. We talked about magnesium. What about the difference between magnesium citrate and glycinate? And there's little drinks you can do of magnesium drink before bed. Can you just talk a little bit about some of those options?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are a ton of different forms of magnesium out there. And every form of magnesium has a different effect on the bowel. So magnesium citrate and magnesium glycinate both tend to have a pretty large impact on the bowels. So if you're really needing to go, that's another sort of acute situation thing that you can implement is to take some magnesium citrate that tends to make the bowels move. And in some cases, it'll cause a flush, right? So you have what you might describe as diarrhea. So it certainly gets the job done in the short term, but those definitely tend to have a bigger effect on the bowels than other forms of magnesium. So you can also take magnesium topically. So usually that's magnesium chloride, and we actually absorb magnesium the best topically. So rather than taking it orally, but there are other forms too. So magnesium threonate and magnesium malate is another option. So the magnesium threonate and malate both have less of an effect on the bowels. So if you're someone who doesn't have struggle with constipation at all, your bowel movements are normal, I would recommend one of those other forms of magnesium, the threonate or the malate or magnesium buffered chelate or something that has less of an effect on the bowels than the mag citrate or the magnesium glycinate. And so it's something that we can really sort of tailor our magnesium intake to what it is our bowels are doing in order to make sure that we're loosening things up if that's what we need, or we're not loosening things up if we don't need that.
And would you recommend we were talking about powders versus supplements before we hopped on here, because I'm drinking a powdery concoction right now, which it's a little bit strange, but I'm getting it down. And so the citrate, which is in the powder form, like what's your preference?
So I tend not to go for powders only because they just seem to be a pain in the rear end, and they're not always tasty. There's one that's a pretty popular magnesium powder out there that's sort of a bedtime drink. That one is not my favorite, primarily because it's combined with some other minerals, and it's sort of on the high side with calcium. And we see a lot of people that have extra levels of calcium in their tissues when we do the hair mineral analysis. And so the only reason, that's the biggest reason anyway, that's not my favorite product. It's because it's got this other calcium, which is also a calming mineral, right? So it absolutely can help aid with sleep. But we see calcium build up so much that my preference is to go with something that's magnesium only, as opposed to something that's combined with calcium. But we do see that it does seem to have a pretty decent impact on sleep. Although my go-to, I would say, is the magnesium spray or magnesium lotion, to where you're taking it topically. And usually what I'll recommend to folks is to do some of the magnesium spray on your feet at night at bedtime as an alternative to the powder drink.
That's what I do. I use the ancient minerals on my feet and puts me in a coma. So it's great. Okay. Aloe or aloe vera. My husband years ago had, sort of just very irregular bowels. Like it was like quite a lot of frequency for him. So he swears by, he did 3 months of aloe vera, and like he literally tells everyone, oh, if you've got issues with your bowels, if you're going too much or too little, his was too much, the aloe vera, and I guess it's coating the, tell us why aloe is important and how it can help.
Yeah. So, I'm not entirely sure why it helps, but I believe what you were about to say, Sarah, is it's sort of got this mucilaginous property.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it just sort of coats, it's soothing, right? So we know it's soothing to a burn. It's soothing to the bowels in the same way. We do see that for some people, it has potential to help in either direction, right? So whether you trend towards constipation or you trend towards diarrhea, it has potential to sort of balance you out.
Mm-hmm. And salt shots. We talk about adding salt to your water, which helps with your adrenals and your, what else does it help with putting salt to the water during the day? Is it adrenals? I can't remember what else.
Yeah, adrenals. And in general, right, it just sort of helps, it helps raise our sodium. And this is something we see a lot too, which is, it's one of those misconceptions out there, right? We think that sodium is really a problem for us. And it really is for some people, but we see people all the time when we do testing, we see low sodium. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, it's because we've switched to a sea salt, right? Which is absolutely better for us, but we don't get quite as much sodium from sea salt as we would from traditional table salt. We tend to see low sodium. And so taking salt intentionally, so in a small amount of water or, a little bit in a large glass of water, that helps to increase our sodium. It supports our adrenals. But one of the things that it also has potential to do is to help alleviate the constipation. And this, just like the magnesium, can sort of be titrated to exactly how much you need, right? So if you're really having an issue with being stopped up, you can do a salt shot. So normally I recommend we start out small, like a 16th of a tablespoon or a teaspoon rather. Tablespoon would be bad. A 16th of a teaspoon or an 1/8 of a teaspoon. I'm at the point now personally where I do a 1/2 of a teaspoon in a full 20-ounce bottle of water first thing in the morning. That really sort of is my secret sauce for perfect bowel movements every single day. But the amount that's right for you is going to depend on your system and exactly what your sodium levels are like. But it's one of those tricks that we can use in an acute situation. If we're really sort of uncomfortable, we've really got some constipation, it's maybe been a couple of days since we've gone, we can drink a salt shot. So with a little bit more, perhaps you sort of can take it. And then if it doesn't work, you wait 20 minutes and you can take a little bit more. But eventually it will cause a flush basically to happen to where you'll have loose stool, which of course isn't the perfect scenario. But what happens is then you're able to sort of clear everything out and sort of, again, start with a fresh slate. The same thing with vitamin C, right? So we can take large amounts of vitamin C. So a normal vitamin C supplement is like 500 milligrams or maybe 1,000 milligrams. It's possible to do, depending on what your vitamin C levels are, as much as like 50 grams. So like 50 to 100 times what the normal dosage is in a day in order to create that same effect, to create a flush basically. So essentially once you've hit your body's needs for vitamin C, the body will actually intentionally flush out whatever it is it doesn't need, whatever the excess was. And as a byproduct of that, it'll also, it'll just flush everything out of the bowels. So the same kind of thing. If you're in a sort of dire situation, you're feeling uncomfortable, you need to be able to eliminate. That's sort of one of those back pocket tricks that you can use if you really need to.
And just back to the sea salt, we like the sea salt, or we also like the brand Real Salt, which is a really great brand. That's the one I use. Okay, final thoughts on constipation, Justine. What's your final thoughts on this one?
Yeah, so the most important thing, in my opinion, is that it's really important to get that nailed down at the beginning of any sort of health goals, right? So we're heading into the new year, and if you have some goals related to your health, if you are suffering from constipation, that's one of the things that you've got to get on top of right away. Otherwise, it's really hard for your body to start to heal, to start to eliminate some of those other symptoms and to eliminate weight, especially, right? So as related to the new year, it's hard to eliminate weight if we've got constipation going on because we continually reabsorb those toxins, and our body likes to store toxins in our fat cells, and it doesn't like to let go of fat cells if we've got toxins going on. And the body knows it can't get rid of those toxins until we actually start to have some good bowel movements. So constipation, for that reason, it's always sort of at the very beginning of the program. Before we start to do any kind of detox work or any kind of deeper work, it's important that we address constipation right up front.
Absolutely. And to me, if you're here right now, you're listening to this and you're preparing your body for a baby, to really, if you have constipation, look into some of these strategies that we've talked about today and being able to address that instead of just focusing on our diagnosis and really helping yourself getting pregnant naturally. So excited for you to implement some of these strategies. And thanks, Justine, for coming on to talk about constipation.
Thanks so much, Sarah.
Hey there, I regularly speak with 5 to 10 couples per week who are struggling to have their baby. And although we want to help everyone, we only have 2 spots available per month to work with us. So the Supercharge Your Fertility Discovery call is for action takers. Really people who are ready to move forward so they can finally have their baby. And if you're not ready and you wait, the risk is you'll need to wait 2 to 3 months for a spot to open up. So if you're seriously considering working with us, go to FabFertile, FABfertile.com and click on book a free call. Then you'll be all booked in and ready to spend 30 minutes to give you the action plan to getting pregnant naturally. That's FabFertile, FABfertile.com and click on book a free call. I'm excited to announce that our Fertility Diet Challenge is live starting this week, Monday, January the 11th. We are taking you through the challenge live. I've got special guest experts from chefs to our nutrition practitioners to myself joining you live on this challenge. We are going to be cooking together and you're going to figure out how diet impacts your fertility. This challenge is for you and your partner. All you need to do is go to fertilitydietfreebie.com. That's fertilitydietfreebie.com. Download the recipes. Join us this week. Excited for you to start. All you need to do is go to fertilitydietfreebie.com. The Get Pregnant Naturally podcast, including show notes and links, provides information with respect to healthy living, nutrition, lab testing, and is intended for informational purposes only. The information provided is not a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is it to be construed as such. We cannot guarantee that the information provided on the Get Pregnant Naturally podcast reflects the most up-to-date medical research. Information is provided without representation or warranties of any kind. Please consult a qualified physician for medical advice and always seek the advice of a qualified health care provider with any questions you may have regarding your health and nutrition program.